So let's get going. I see some of the regulars are here, so thank you so much for your support. We've got a fairly decent audience tonight. And I do want to say that before we start, that a good friend of mine died in the bee business here, Peter Borst. I would consider him to be our bee historian. Him and I go back about 15 years or so. I first met Peter in New York City on a little journey that him and Al and I went on for pollination. And I became friends with him ever since that day. And he supported my research pieces and with literature that I needed. And just a great guy. I've had him speak to CBA and other clubs. I spoke with him in other clubs around the area. And Peter was a force in American Bee Journal. If you get that magazine, you'll see he had an article in there every month. And again, he just matured as a bee historian, and he's preserved for us a whole interesting part of our bee legacy. And also, he basically put together what we can look back on as documentation of the history of beekeeping in the United States. And he was a thorough, creative, and wonderful writer. And I miss him, and I know that there are hundreds of beekeepers that knew him well that miss him. So Peter Borst died quietly at home last week. So let's move on to something a little bit more positive. And I know we usually start with our bloom calendar, and we are going to do that. But first, before we do that, we have Peter Hayes on here, and he has put together a way that we can all sort of share in blooms around the state. So I've invited people. Peter actually has volunteered to give a little talk tonight about how he's simplified the process, and maybe this will work for us. We're still struggling with a way to get everybody involved in what's going on in terms of the bloomscape. And there's so much interesting technology out there that would help us do that. And the one thing that I always emphasize, and I think folks that have been beekeeping for a while can verify, if you understand the blooms that are occurring in your area, they occur with regularity. It's not like, they're just popping up out of the blue. You always have a sense of what your bees might be going after. Like right now, they're on, autumn olive in my area and other plants, but autumn olive is out like crazy. So you get a bunch of that nectar coming back into the colony. And I know that I can see the plants, but I also know from my calendar that they should be out. So, all right. So Peter's
I
going
think I can
take it
do
over.
this. All right. So last year we tried something with iNaturalist and the Seek application, the mobile Seek application, and it was okay. However, it was a little bit convoluted to get all the observations into one place, and so we didn't get too many people involved. But so this year, like Bill mentioned, trying to do this in a little bit easier way, using common tools, and look at some of the new tools that are out there that pretty much everybody could get to on the web. Again, make it as easy as possible. So what I'm going to show you, and it's going to be pretty brief, it's really just two pieces. One is, for everybody that's familiar with Excel, it's a Google Sheets web page. So it is basically Excel or very similar to it. And the only information we're asking for is you observed a bloom, and I'm going through right here on the screen. So you observed it on a certain date, who you are. We're not looking for your whole name. It could be your initials. It could be anything you want in here as the observer, what plant you saw, and what town you saw it in. We're not, again, looking to collect data at, a real granular level as far as exactly where you live or anything like that. The rest of the information that gets filled in here is filled in kind of in the background. And so I've been collecting information with, Ben Vossler, who lives close to me in Westbrook. So he's put some data in. We got a couple other people put data in just sort of test this out. And I'll show you just really quick. I see the dogwoods are in bloom right now. So I'll really put flowering dogwood here. And I was in Old Saybrook. And so that's all you need to fill in for a bloom that you see. The rest is filled in. I looked at multiple sources and I tried to get to some happy place as far as what was in agreement using artificial intelligence and some sources as to nectar and pollen value. This is kind of like a 0 to 10 scale, and also what the bloom color would generally be. But one other thing here, there are links here where you could bring up, a picture of what the flower generally looks like and so on. Now, the value here is really the next step. And you could see here, click here to link to the bloom calendar. So this uses something called, for anybody that's familiar, it's a business intelligence tool, which takes data and, allows you to present it in a million different ways. So basically, the information that we saw in the sheet will automatically be brought into here to this tracker. And then there's different ways this can be presented. And even when you're looking at it, you could slice the data in a bunch of ways. Like right now, it's the last 30 days. So if you wanted to, you could say, you could look and say, okay, the past 14 days, what did we see? And it'll narrow down that data. Could also filter on towns, on plants. There's a lot of different things, or on your observations. And then there's also, as I mentioned, if you're putting towns in, we can see, we can filter on what's happening in different towns, but using a map type of graphic here. So when I was up in Cheshire a couple weeks ago, I did look. I think I found a couple plants up there. I think there was a crab apple that was around the bee yard. I believe it was a crab apple. And there's garlic mustard all over the state. So it'll show you that. You can bring another town in. This is Westbrook. But hopefully, as we get more towns, this will be look a little more interesting. The other thing it has is a database. And I'll say right now that I'm still finding plants that I didn't have in the database, and I'm adding them as we go along. But you can look up any plants by typing a little bit of the name. I also added this so if you wanted to see, like, for instance, the blooms that have some level of, they're either high, very high, medium, high, you'd see those type of plants. Okay, so it's out there, something you want to fool around with, and then you can click on this link to get to this view. And again, you go crazy, do whatever you want as far as filtering or looking at other things. Is there any questions on any of this?
All you need is one link.
Yes, because here where we're collecting the data, it's got the link for the tracker. So which is this here.
I'll try to use it. And for those that tech savvy beekeepers that we have on this call, thank you so much for being an advocate of our ongoing quest to get folks to record their blooms. I mean, I started, of course, with the Lyme disease version of it, where you go through the woods and catch Lyme's disease from looking at, I got it twice, from bloom, hard-earned. I have a hard-earned bloom calendar. So this is an easier way, but you still have to see the stuff to actually do it. So I'm gonna just put my classic one up for now. So I'm gonna just review a little bit of where April ended. And the reason I want to do that is because the white Dutch clover is out and bees were working it. All right, so that came into the colonies at the end of April. Now, this was the first time I brought a group along that could actually look and see the nectaries in white Dutch clover. And you can also just put it in your mouth if you want to figure out if it's making honey this year. I mean, it's making nectar. So it's sometimes, some years it's dry or bees don't work it because they have something else to go to. But it was available and making nectar this year, and bees were working it. And then we ended April with the orchards. So the peaches came out really nice and apples all over the place. And so that's a mixed blessing for us. If you're near an orchard, you could get a little bit of pesticide exposure. Otherwise, they're good, for pollination. They're a good source of pollen and nectar for you. But let's get into May. And we're believe it or not, moving along in May. And you can see what's going on in May. We're down around where tulip poplar and black locust and all of that will begin to bloom. All right, so we should look forward to some really wonderful blooms coming up very shortly. Autumn olive, which I had down at the 4th, came out exactly on the 4th around in my area. This barberry, the common barberry, I learned this last year, is something that bees will work like crazy, but not something that you should encourage in your yard because from what I understand, it's a tick magnet. So there's lots of ticks that will join your yard if you have one of them in it. And we will see black locusts, our infamous bloom around the middle of May. And that's a bloom that we look forward to. I don't know why, but every year we sort of have these blooms beekeepers have that they just love to hate because black locusts can come on for one day. Black locusts could come on, the bloom could come on for hours in fall. It can get washed out by rain very easily, or it could last for weeks, like it did a couple of years ago. And the thing about black locusts is if you were able to get enough of that in your supers, you have one of the most beautiful, almost water white honeys that we can make here in Connecticut. Absolutely gorgeous taste, just pure white. It looks just gorgeous in a jar, but we hardly ever get it. Tulip poplar, another thing that comes out at the end of May, and one bloom of tulip poplar has enough nectar in it to satisfy the needs of a bee. It doesn't have to go anywhere else. And I haven't seen bees work tulip poplar a lot. And I don't know why, but it might be that it's so close to black locust that if black locust comes out at the same time that tulip poplar does, they have to fly high in the tree to get tulip poplar. They're usually mature and 80 feet tall. So it's a little bit harder for them to, maybe it's a little bit harder for them to forage on that. But tulip poplar used to be talked about as a fabulous bloom and very productive for honey and everything else. And then just in Connecticut, I think it dried up maybe a decade ago. And it's not that it's dry, there's nectar in it. I don't know why bees don't work it as hard. But so if you see a tulip poplar tree in bloom this year, get your binoculars out and let us know if bees are working it in your area. Now, there will be bumblebees in it and native pollinators. And even if you walk under a tulip poplar, when it gets to petal fall, it will fall on the ground. And if you're lucky enough to see a whole flower, you can take it apart and you can lick the nectar out of it. It's sweet and beautiful. So I know it's making nectar, just that it's maybe not that popular. Okay, so we'll end the May with alternate leaf dogwood, which is a great little tree to have it's a native. And if you want to plant something that'll grow really quick and give you lots of beautiful blooms for bees, will work them from all over your neighborhood. Alternate leaf dogwood, not a hybrid, but the native variety is a wonderful little tree to add to your landscape if you're looking for something. They don't grow big. They only get about 25 feet, but they just attract everything that you want for pollination. All the bees will pollinate it. Then it makes this beautiful little fruit that birds eat all winter long. So it's a great tree to have. We're looking forward to lots of good things in June, which we'll talk about then. So I told a little story before everybody joined about a mishap I had in the yard with a package. So if you were installing packages, I'm sure you all checked that your queen's alive. It's the first thing we do. And whether or not your queen is alive in a cage or dead, the bees are still attracted to her because, she's got a bunch of queen mandibular pheromone that she's spread around that cage. And even if she dies, I think it takes a while for that VOC to dissipate. So she's sort of pretty popular, even though she's dead. And I thought I would substitute her with a queen cell, which I never got actually in the colony before the virgin queen came out. And then she ended up in the colony alone. So if you're going to come to the bee yard, you will see that colony. It's the transparent colony. I looked at it today and they're behaving normally. I don't know what that actually means, but they're there and I don't think they've killed that queen yet. They may. But old school beekeepers would tell you that you could sneak a virgin into a colony when you had a laying worker situation and that she would sort of be cast off by the bees, not being attended to at all. And then finally she comes on and becomes she goes out, mates, and comes back and becomes the dominant laying female in the colony. So I don't really know if that's true. I do know that during requeening operations, a lot of commercial beekeepers will just drop cells right on the top frames of the bars on their colony, and then allow whatever happens naturally to occur. So, for instance, they're requeening without taking the old queen out. And in those cases, if a new queen comes out of a cell, she's very fit and doesn't have big ovarials yet. She will. It doesn't take long for them to mature, and she can bend her abdomen very easily, and that's not a characteristic of a fully fecund laying queen. So if they join in a fitness contest, and how that occurs is two queens will grab each other by the mandibles and hold on to their mandibles face to face. And then the queens will probe through their non-hardened segments between their ventral side. If you look at a bee, of course, it can bend its abdomen. To allow it to bend, there are areas of integument that are soft. So queens will probe each other for that. And of course, a virgin queen has more potent venom constituents. So it's not a contest. The virgin usually wins in that case. And so that's I was also mentioning that you might have found that this year's packages were a little bit more defensive than other years, but I'm not sure if that's right. That's just my sort of observation about that. And if that's the case, then you're going to have to figure out what you would do with a defensive colony in your yard. And
Not fun.
well, yeah, you'll have fun, but you can also do something else. What you can do with a defensive colony is, and I have to do this with another one that's in our yard before Sunday, is light your smoker. Light your smoker, or maybe like two smokers, I don't know. But light your smoker, don your bee gear, and then you can actually set up a new hive stand somewhere distant from the hive that you want to try to calm down. And what you do is you take the entire colony over to that location. And in the original location, you put a box and a bottom board. And if you have similar equipment, it's best to try to use similar equipment when you're doing this. And then what will occur is the bees will come out of the hot colony right away and start chasing you around maybe, or bounce off your veil. But when they finally settle down for that evening, they'll all go back to the old location. So what you have there then is all the aggressive guard bees that were coming out after you, or terrorizing the yard, or terrorizing your neighbor, or whatever they're doing, are in that box. And so that's then your opportunity to close them in and move them to another place. Now, you won't have a queen in that box, but it'll buy you some time. Rather than tossing out the whole colony, trying to kill it with whatever people use to kill colonies, or take some other kind of drastic action to mitigate that circumstances of terrible bees in your yard, you can do it this way. And it will not return to being defensive for quite a while, because you've got to go through, a series of emerging bees that the scientific name is eclose, but we say emerging. It'll take a while for that population to get up to speed again. So what you can do with that little break till enough bees emerge, you can requeen that colony. So if you plan this, you'd be on your way to a calmer colony. So if you planned it and you had a queen that you were going to reintroduce into that colony at the same time now, because you don't have a really aggressive field force in that colony anymore, you can requeen it. Should be easier to find the queen. It's a little bit more, a lot calmer. And, so then you can requeen it at the same time. So it's a strategy to save a bunch of bees that you don't have to kill. Your downside is you got to figure out, you want to do something with the field force that you have.
I actually took your advice. You gave what you just gave to this group right now last year when Dad and I had two defensive hives, and it was a process, but it did work on one. We do have a question in the chat. What is the status of the lanternfly? There's no signs of it at Chatfield.
Oh, so we saw him last year. Now, Paula might be better at answering this. Paula?
I did answer actually in the chat that I just received.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Yesterday that spotted lanternfly from the USDA that they've hatched in Greenwich. They're on their way. They're starting in Greenwich and moving across the state maybe, but they're here.
Yeah, they've been here. Armando was a lanternfly specialist. He was finding them all over the place around here. So yeah, they've been here for a couple of years, and we saw them a little bit last year. And of course, the behavioral adaptation is amazing for lanternflies. Almost every other flying insect attends to their young and will lay eggs in stationary locations. And then the next brood develops, and it's fine, like a praying mantis cocoon. Yeah, if you find one, by the way, if you find them, this is the time of year to grab them, because you can plant them in your garden and you will just have tens of thousands of little praying mantis all around to chew insects, bothersome insects all year long. But anyway, I'm off the topic. But lanternflies will actually lay their eggs on, and not intentionally, but just indiscriminately, on moving vehicles like motorcycles, buses, cars, trains. And that's how they've been able to sort of spread so easily, is that egg mass ends up in another place, and it just acts as a wonderful transportation migration strategy for the fly. So that's how they got here, and they'll continue to get here because they come in on everything. Pallets of stuff at Home Depot, whatever, they just come in. Now, Paula, we don't do any inspections for them, right?
No, they're established here now, and so we just expect them to be everywhere in Connecticut.
Okay. All right.
We have a question from Vladimir. I did a Demaree split, and now we have capped queen cells at the bottom of the frames in the top box. Does that mean that the bees in the bottom box are going to swarm, or are the bees in the top box going to swarm?
The bees in the top box are going to swarm. So I've used the Demaree split technique for years, and you got to keep after the swarm cells. So the way that question was worded, Gary, was there swarm cells in the bottom box? No.
It doesn't say. It just says now we have capped. Actually, I take it back. We do have capped queen cells at the bottom frames in the top box.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. In the top box. Yeah. Yeah. You got to cut those out if you want to keep them if you want to keep it that way. All right. So it's a technique to make honey, and you save your whole field force. And that's, you stop swarming and you make a lot of honey. It's very easily, it's explained in many interesting ways in the literature, and you can read it. It's different than using a Schnellgrove board, say, for instance. This is where people get a little bit confused with it. To make a separate colony on top of one, it's almost the exact same manipulation, except that you're not letting that top box make a queen. Now, the only way you can do it, if you wanted that top box to make a queen, and they are in the process of making them, you'd have to give them an entrance to fly out of, because they won't come, a virgin queen wouldn't be able to get out of that colony if she emerges in one of them cells, because she won't be able to get through the queen excluder if you made it in the way that I'm thinking you would, a bottom box with just the frame where the queen was found, maybe some drawn comb foundation, maybe a frame of honey or something, and maybe one other open frame of brood. And then a queen excluder, how many supers? 2 or 3. If you have drawn supers, maybe 2. Then another queen excluder, and the top box would have all the brood that you found, other than those couple of frames that you put in the bottom box. If you built your Demaree that way, which is a classic way to build it, then your goal is to try to keep it from swarming. To do that, you got to cut the cells out until there are no other choices for the bees to make queens. So your first cut should have been about 5 days or so after you made your split. You could look and see the cells, and then you would know, yes, there's cells here. You can leave them, you can harvest them, you could do lots of things with those cells, but you got to get them out of that box if you're planning on making a lot of honey, if that's your goal, to make honey with the Demaree split. So you then you got to go back again after you've cut your first series of swarm cells out, and you got to cut them out again. And because you've missed some, for sure you've missed some. Then what will happen is the bees will make a queen from an older larva. So one of Armando's questions in the chat is to explain a little bit about an intercaste queen. So that's the other thing you can get out of this process. So let me explain that a little bit. But before, let me close the discussion on the Demaree. And so that's what you would do. You would continue to cut those cells out. Don't let that top box make a queen. And then all of that brood will emerge, and it will then be part of the field force for that colony, and you don't lose any of your bees, and you can make a lot of honey that way. So it works. It's a lot of work making certain that you're keeping that swarm tendency down, and works fine. Now, an intercaste queen is, let's start with an egg. So an egg is laid by a queen, and then that egg sort of lays down in the cell after day 3 and becomes larva. That's the perfect way to make a queen. From there on, if she's fed royal jelly, at that point, she will develop into a beautiful queen, and you'll have a nice queen. That's how a swarm queen works. So let's say you come along and you cut out your swarm cells in your box for some reason. Hopefully, you're not doing that practice unless you're trying to make honey with a Demaree split or something like that. And your bees see that. Well, what they do then is they will then continue to pick larvae. And after about 36 hours or so, those larvae can be made into queens, except they are not really queens. They are what we refer to as intercasts. And an intercaste is a combination of worker and queen. So they'll come out with an abbreviated abdomen sometimes. They're just not the right kind of queen. It's more of a problem when you get a package of bees and the queen's released and then they start to supersede her right away. Well, you might see this as a beekeeper. And so if you asked me about that, or some of the other folks who have been beekeeping for a while, they'll tell you to give her a second chance. Give the queen that came with the package a second chance and cut down those cells. And if you do, she may be laying erratically, or they may be eating her eggs. They could be doing lots of things. They'll make another set of supersedure cells, and likely all of those will be in the intercaste realm, or some of them at least would be. I mean, they may pick some eggs she's laying, if she's still laying some. But yeah, so then you can get that intercaste queen. So there's a little mathematical thing you can do with supersedure cells, and I'll let you try to figure it out, and then at the end, maybe we'll give you the answer. If you came on a frame that had supersedure cells, and maybe there was 5 of them right on the face of that frame, which ones would you cut down first? The bigger ones or the smaller ones? Well, we'll get back to that question. All right, what else we got, Gare?
Excellent. So Anthony posted a very nice comment about your friend and his friend, Peter Borst. I'm just going to read it real quick.
Please.
Here's a link to the Beekeeping Today podcast where Peter Borst discusses his book, The Golden Age of Beekeeping. As Bill noted, Peter was a tremendous historian regarding beekeeping in the U.S. Being a beekeeper in New York, it was always a pleasure to engage with Peter about New York State beekeeping history. He will be missed. And Anthony included the link to the podcast. So Anthony, thank you. I echo Paula's comments. Thank you for sharing that. So very nice.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right. So Paul L has a question. Each year my colonies fill the lower brood boxes with nectar, ignoring the honey supers. Queen excluders or no queen excluders, what am I doing wrong?
You're probably not doing anything wrong. What you have to understand is that bees will not store nectar anywhere unless they run out of room in that bottom box. Let's think of this in terms of just one single brood box. If you had about 8 frames of brood down there, that covers about 75% of each frame, you would have enough space for the queen to live just fine. But she would not so brood would be fine. By the time she got done laying through the 8th frame. The first frames that she laid, the centers would be emerging brood. She'd get back in there and lay it up again, and it can go on and on and on for that. That's what the theory of single brood box rearing is all about. Now, at the same time, if they had built a shoulder of honey over the top of all the frames down at the bottom box, then that will define the size of that colony. And for the most part, biologically for the bees, I'm saying, they may not go through a queen excluder. And if you have foundation up there, they may just ignore it as open space, right? So I don't know what kind of situation you have, but if bees need to be showing you that they're ready to build wax and fill a super up, and they do that by developing a lot of wax from their wax glands on the edges of colonies that have combs that have a lot of honey on them, you'll see they'll turn white. So we call that frost wax. You'll see on the top bars and on the shoulders of frames with honey near the edge of the colonies, like 1 in 10 or 1 in 8, whatever you do, however you're keeping your bees. When you see that, then you know that bees are running out of space to put honey in that box. So then you have to give them a way to get into your supers. And if there's all crowns of honey on the top of every frame, they'll likely just develop swarm cells and leave. Or you have to give them a path through. So what I do usually is I will put, if I find that situation, I'll put a frame in the middle of the colonies or two that don't have any honey shoulder over the top of them. And that will allow bees to walk over that section and up into the supers. Now, so I don't know. They should behave just normally after that and fill your supers up if they stay in the colony, if they don't swarm, that is. Does that help at all?
Well,
Yes, it does. I was in the hives the other day, and they are starting to put down some frost comb on the comb in the honey supers, so that's encouraging. But what I did see is when I was down in the bottom box, right over the entrance, was a frame of fresh capped honey from this year. I mean, white wax, capped over honey down in that bottom box. So that's what I've seen in the past too, that they start storing. Does the amount of honey that's left over from the winter, does that make a difference? If you have a hive that's very heavy with honey versus one that's just about starved out for honey, will that make a difference as to where they store it?
No, their priority is to build a frame, a perfect frame that has brood in the center, right? About 75% of those cells with brood. Right on the edge of that brood is what we refer to as the energy interface. In there would be open nectar and some raw pollen that bees are bringing in. So those two, a 2 or 3 cell band that goes all the way over the top of that broom. You should see that. You're likely to see that in almost every frame that has brood in it. That's what, as I say, that's what we refer to as the energy interface. Now, above that, bees will build a shoulder of honey. So that to them is their ideal nest, right? So they have a shoulder of honey above, and then that open energy interface. And by the way, as the brood is capped, there's no need for that fresh pollen and open nectar, and that frame will become, the shoulder will become bigger for capped honey. But at some point, they'll run out of space, and then they'll look for other places to put it. And usually they go to a super if you have it on top. Using 1 box, Paul, or 2 brood boxes?
I'm using 2 boxes, yeah.
The spaces have to be filled with their own resources before they're going to think about going into that super. They don't automatically go to a super and put honey in it, if that's what you're thinking. That doesn't happen automatically.
a link to an article from the Cornell University, the Cornell Chronicle, pertaining to Cornell helping to pinpoint the cause of massive honeybee die-offs. So if anyone's interested in reading, it's a pretty quick read, and it's about what some of the doctors are doing at Cornell University to identify why.
That's great. All right, so you can read that. Paula's keeping it from us. She's keeping a secret. She's not going to tell us what happened to the bee die-off. Paula, are you like everybody else? You don't know at this point?
We don't know anything yet.
We don't know anything else.
They
There are
haven't
some,
talked to
there's some
me, so.
Yeah, when she finds out, when Paula finds out through her extensive network of other bee inspectors and my university contacts and the folks that I know are doing the analyzation of bee samples, wax and propolis and pollen, everything they do when we get scared like this, haven't found anything that they think is abnormal, except for the iridescent virus, which we're not going to talk about. I think it's a little bit of speculation on some writers in American Bee Journal that are using dogma as a scientific basis for their proclamations, but it's likely to be a virus or something else. But I don't think we're going to ever find out. I mean, that's just going to be we didn't find out about CCD, so we may not find out about this either. I know that it's impacting the industry extremely sadly. And Paul's going to give a talk on that at some garden club or something soon, aren't you, Paul?
I'm going to give a talk about the status of bees at the New London Extension in June. Yeah, in a couple
Okay,
weeks.
all right. So go over there and listen to Paula talk about the fate of pollinators in our community. Right now, we don't know.
Bill, there's a question from Vladimir. How can my bee swarm if there is no adult queen in the top box?
If they made swarm cells, did they make swarm cells? That's what I want to know.
Yeah,
Hi.
there were like 3 swarm cells at the bottom of the frames in the top box. My understanding is that in order for a swarm to occur, the old queen leaves with a large population of bees, leaving the swarm cells behind. So are you saying that maybe they've already swarmed then? I don't know.
Oh yeah. Are the swarm cells capped, Flemmer?
Yes, they are.
Yeah, you missed it by a fair amount of time. So
Really?
normally, let's talk about, nominally, since we're in swarm season, and this is a great topic for swarm season, is once those cells are capped, that's when the queen leaves with about 40% of the colony, maybe 50, a mixture of bees, but they tend toward younger bees because when bees, by the way, decide on who's going with the swarm, of course, they make a choice, an astute biological choice, which would mean that they would take younger bees because they've got to have a long time to survive as a colony that's going to make gather all new resources and try to survive the winter. But yeah, so they go at about the time the queen cells are capped. Now, I have seen all kinds of variations on this. So I'm just giving you, like I said, that's the nominal theory. I have seen queens laying in a colony with a number of capped queen cells. And I have seen eggs in cells on the day that a colony swarms. So for instance, I happened to be in the yard and watch a swarm cast out of a colony and go and look at that colony and find eggs. We like to normalize biology and make it really understandable, but swarming is just one of the most magnificent things that occurs in our bee yards every year, and it's mysterious to no end. And the cause of swarming, maybe it's crowding, maybe it's they've got too much juvenile hormone, and they just want to reproduce. Whatever it is, it occurs with some regularity every year around this time. And we like to say, well, they chase the queen around. They keep her from laying. The first indication you can get is that they're backfilling the brood nest with nectar. And all of those things do occur. So you'll see that. And in those cases, beekeepers will proclaim that they have denied the queen any capability to lay eggs. So she is now flight ready because her ovaries shrink almost instantly. If you took a queen out of a colony, a beautifully plump, fecund queen, and you took her and you isolated her in a single frame nuke for a while, and there wasn't really no place for her to lay, the next time you open that nuke, she can fly, right? And will. So that theory it seems good, except when it doesn't happen, when she's in there and lays eggs till the day she leaves. So lots of things can happen in there. So what you need to do now, Paul, is keep track of that date you saw the swarm cells. And now go back and look. Now you're on day 9. So you've got 7 days until there's a virgin queen that emerges from those cells. And if you're going to get this colony queen right for the rest of the year, those queens have to come out, have a fitness contest, and one of them has to win that fitness contest, go out and get mated, and so forth. So you're looking at 7 days from the time you saw those cells, maybe less. Maybe you only have 5 days until they emerge. And then so you're going to leave this thing alone, and you're going to go back in like 12 days from the time you saw those swarm cells. And you're going to look for evidence that some of the swarm cells are chewed out, and that the other swarm cells, there's a cap missing on the top, or it's just hinged on the top. And you'll know that there's a virgin out there and trying to get mated. Now, you don't do anything to disturb that colony during this period. If you're lucky, you got about an 80% chance that queen will come back. One will win the fitness contest, go out, get mated, and come back and be a wonderful queen.
But what I don't understand is that the original queen is in the bottom box, and there's a queen excluder, so she doesn't have access to the top box, and yet they formed what looked to me like swarm cells at the bottoms of the frames. So, and I guess it just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, so it doesn't make sense to me either. So without any evidence that you're actually looking at swarm cells, I may have gone through a long, exhausting, and maybe even boring discussion about something that's actually not even true. You might be looking at drone cells down there.
No, they're definitely swarm cells.
Well,
right?
then your queen excluder failed. I mean, they're not guaranteed to work. I've got a stack of them in my garage that I cut up and use for other things that has written on there in indelible ink, failed to keep a queen out. My guess is your colony swarmed, and no reason to have that queen excluder in there then on the top box. That's for sure. Take that out and let them try to build the queen.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right.
So we have a question from Frank. Can you take the frame of a queen cap cell and some cap brood into a nuke box to start another hive?
Absolutely. That's the way you do it. You can do that if you want to reproduce that queen, because you like something about her. You may like the fact that she made a lot of honey, or she's gentle, and you like working that bee. So yeah, you can do that. You intentionally can wait for any queen that you want to make a simple nuke out of, and propagate her genetics in your yard by doing that exact thing. You have to be very careful. If the queen cells are advanced, you have to move them very gingerly. You have to plan in advance where you're going to put that nuke. So you put her in there, you put those cells in there, you give them another frame or even 2 of capped brood, nothing open in there. Then you go back to the colony that is donating these cells, and you get frames of brood out and shake them into your nuke, like maybe 2 full frames of brood, and shake them into there. You're not going to leave that brood in there. You're going to put it back in the donor colony. But you want to make certain that your nuke gets stacked with a lot of nurse bees. And then you let it go ahead and grow into a full-size colony. And you can leave it in 5 frames. You can leave it in a 3-frame nuke. You can do lots of things with it to get it to grow into a colony. You have to make certain that colony comes up queen right with those cells. Make sure that whatever you put that nuke into, it is dimensionally the same as the box you took it out of, because the mistake you can make is some nuke boxes have a little bit shorter depth. And if you've got nice, beautiful swarm cells that are hanging off the bottoms of frames, you sometimes have to make adjustments to make certain that you don't smash that swarm cell when you put it down in the new colony. But yeah, you can do it that way. Now, you will not have a field force for days, because, for a week, maybe. I put together 2 of them in our teaching yard. And if you come to the yard, you'll see those. and they're 2 weeks old, and they just started to forage now, but they're bringing back pollen. They can't have a queen yet. It's too early, but they are collecting pollen at this point, and also nectar. So I know they're on their way. Now, you can do one other thing if you want to make a nice split and you have the time to do this. It's sort of a Doolittle method. What you can do is, over the colony that you want to take brood from, you want to make sure that you're only taking nurse bees. You have to have extra equipment for this, of course. You can take brood out of almost any colony and put it in a box above a queen excluder and leave it there. Right. So now on a nice, bright, sunny day, and it's warm, it's in the 70s, or even now, today would have been a perfect time to do it. But if you bring open brood, you'll know, or even cap brood, it works with cap brood also. But what happens is nurse bees will migrate up to that brood and cover it, because that's what they do. That's their job, right? They're going to feed those bees, and they're going to keep the other cap brood warm. So they do that. And you come back an hour later, even if you didn't take the time. So what I'm trying to say here is, if you don't want to just shake bees into the box, you can make certain that they're all nurse bees with this technique. So when you come back to that box that's over the top of the queen excluder, of course you have to put a cover on it and all that, you'll have nothing but nurse bees on those frames. And then you can bring them over to wherever you want to donate nurse bees to, anywhere in the yard. It doesn't have to be in your nuke. It could be anywhere you want another population of a broader population of nurse bees in the colony, and shake them in. And those will be nurse bees, and they will stay in the colony you shake them in. They won't fly back. All right. Pro tip. That was a pro tip.
All right. So Anthony, he put a little PSA in here about the lanternfly. Back in March 2025, the Northeast IPM Center in Ithaca, New York, had a 3-day seminar on the spotted lanternfly, with updates, research, article presentations, with many YouTube videos developed, and he included the link. So Tim saw eggs and many capped cells today. So I guess he's just letting us know this, which is great. It's always good to see.
Well, yeah, Tim. So Tim, is this your first time seeing this?
No, Bill, you were just mentioning swarm behavior and like queen. This is
Oh,
Tim.
that's you, Tim. Is this Tim?
I was
I need
saying,
last names.
you were mentioning like seeing capped swarm cells and the queens laying at the same time. And I'm just confirming that I saw that behavior also today. Like,
Oh, yes. I mean, yeah. And it defies the sort of like ABC, XYZ of beekeeping book to try to tell you what the process actually is. So Tim donated 4 beautiful frames of brood to a Layens hive that didn't make it over the winter. And we started a split just like I've been describing. Tim brought over these beautiful calm bees. And that was the colony, Tim's, that I sort of cut the swarm cell out of, that I brought over to the transparent hive. Tim, were you here for that story? No.
I think I just missed it. Yeah, I think I just missed that story. It came a
Yeah.
little.
I stole a swarm cell from that Layens hive for that brood that you brought over.
Yeah.
There's beautiful swarm cells, and one virgin emerged in my hand, well, near my hand, when I was on the way to try to bring it to the transparent hive, where I got a package with a dead queen. So I was going to just like paste a cell in there and let her emerge, but I didn't get a chance to do that. She came out. But there was other cells in there that were cutting the cap. So when a swarm cell, I'm glad that you said this, brought us into this subject. So you can figure out when a swarm cell is about to emerge with 2 very distinct bee behaviors that occur right away. First of all, or not right away, over the period of time that the cell's capped, over the 7-day period. Bees will do 2 things. They're going to help the queen emerge from that cell, and by doing so, they chew the wax off the tip of the cell. So what it looks like is there's a beautiful wax peanut shell, and then at the top is more of a brownish, light yellow brownish ring. And that's where the bees have chewed the wax off so that the queen can emerge without having to deal with having to go through a layer of wax. All she has to do is, and queens have extremely strong mandibles, And all she has to do is incise a little circle around the perimeter where that cocoon meets the rest of the wax on the cell that they've left behind. She makes a nice little semicircle there, and she just pops right out. So you can watch that behavior. You can see if you see her proboscis poking through a little slit at the end of that swarm cell, she is coming out of there in a matter of minutes. And then what I suggest you do then is sit there and watch, because you can see a brand new queen come out of a cell, and it's a wonderful thing to see. The other thing is that bees will help queens with what they call vibrational signaling. So I have videos on this stuff that I have collected over the years when I was inside colonies. And what they'll do is they'll grab a hold of the queen cell, a bunch of them, and they'll shake it. All right. So what they're doing at that point is the bees are part of the selection process. You'll see other swarm cells they're not doing that to. So there's some way, in my opinion, and this is just anecdotal, that it may have some role in selecting which queen they stimulate to come out first. And of course, there's all of these bee lore stories about super sisters may be doing that. In other words, we know that there's patrolines in colonies, and some of those bees might act as little unified forces because they're from the same patroline. In other words, they have the same drone father. And of course, the queen is the mother of all the bees in the colony. And there's other bees in the colony that have been fertilized with sperm from other drones. So they're not related in the same way as the sisters are that have the same father. So is it that these wonderful little bees are promoting their gene line by making certain that they shake a cell that they know has their queen in it? So I just love that theory. It's so mysterious. I love it.
On that Lands hive, I just took 4 more frames out of it yesterday because it's making more swarm cells. That thing is just booming and booming.
Yeah, you can bring them over. Yeah, you can bring them over anytime. We just put them right back in there. We've got plenty of spaces for more brood in there.
Great. I'd love to swap out because I could, yeah, I need the frames now to give more space to that current queen. So she's still in there. So.
Oh yeah. No, there's
Great.
another 5 frames you could take. So that would be great.
Perfect.
But she's a great queen too. That's a very common colony.
Yeah, I'll bring them on Sunday then. That's great. Yeah, she's one of my teaching hives. So it's real.
Okay.
Hey, Tim, do you also want to, I guess, just speak real quick to your comment that you were inspecting a hive yesterday, just as it was about to swarm?
Yeah, it was the first time that's happened for me where I was opening the hive and it was a hive that had been like a real dinky one. It's been strange. And then I gave them some brood from another hive because they were really small. And then it looked like they were making what I thought were emergency cells off of some of that. It was mostly caps, but there must have been some eggs. Very confusing. So I just didn't really think much about it. And I was checking them yesterday. And as I opened up the lid, they just started swarming. So I caught them. But yeah, I'm not really sure what was going on with that hive. But it was my first time of like catching a swarm right at the time when I was inspecting the hive. Pretty fun.
Yeah, that's a fun thing to do. I have little strips of queen excluder that I keep at the ready this time of year. So if you're in a yard, when I was doing a lot more beekeeping and had way more colonies than I currently have the responsibility to care for now, I would always have these with me. And I'd be, during this time of year, you go through a yard, you can see a swarm occurring in a colony. And like sometimes the queen is reluctant to leave. She doesn't always leave first. Usually some scouts leave. And so she comes out around, like nominally the queen will come out, somewhere maybe in the middle or maybe even sometimes toward the end. I have seen colonies dragging a queen out that did not want to leave. So with these little strips of queen excluder, if I see a swarm occurring, I'll run over and pin that little queen excluder on the entrance. And I have been able to stop a number of swarms because the queen can't come out. And then it doesn't, if by the way, you pin that little queen excluder strip on the front of the colony and the swarm occurs anyway, you missed her, right? She went out. But if you do catch her, that swarm will bivouac nearby and then it'll just return to the colony. And that's the fun. That's a really wonderful thing to see this time of year. I think we think of swarms as sort of negative, but I'll tell you, it is the most fascinating time of the season for observing biology. Lots of things could happen. Puddle swarms occur. Queens can't fly. They're too fecund to fly, and they try, and then they bounce down on the ground, and then you got 25,000 bees in a big puddle, and somewhere in your yard or on the side of a tree where the queen just couldn't make it because she's not, she didn't go to the gym before she flew out. If you beekeep long enough and you've got big enough yards, you'll see swarms return from a failed swarm all the time. I must have seen, I don't know, dozens of those over the years where, oh, there's my queen. I did hate to see her go. And then the colony comes right back. I watched swarms leave, go to my neighbor's area, go into an apple tree and stay there for hours, break bivouac, and fly back into their original colony. So, lots of things can happen during swarm season. So it's a fun thing to watch. And the other thing that occurs, and it might occur to you, and you won't even notice this, in one of these failed swarms, your queen will come back to the colony in that rush and never go in the entrance. But if you have a screen bottom board, she'll crawl under there and stay there. And this happens with virgins too, that they get lost and they come back from being mated. They go to the colony next door, and instead of going in the entrance where they're not welcome, they'll go under the colony and live there. And people say, they're building comb on the underside of my colony, and the bees will feed her through the screen. If you have a screen bottom board, they'll draw out comb. She'll lay on there. So it's lots of interesting things could happen. You'll see it all.
I have some swarm boxes out, and just wondering if others do, and if anyone has caught swarms yet.
Yeah, I have 4 swarm boxes outside. There's a lot of activity, but nothing yet.
Well, I had a swarm, a little 8-frame colony, wintered beautifully in our youth yard, and it swarmed 2 days ago. It cast right in this tree near the box, and I missed it. And today when I was in the yard, I heard, of course you can hear a classic swarm, immediately that there's not that much bee action anywhere. And I turned around and it was leaving to go someplace else. So there are swarms occurring, of course, and they will occur with some regularity now until the end of May, for sure. It coincides with the major flows, and that makes sense. If you think about it, biologically, they have to have a good start to their new colony. So they need a lot of nectar. They're going to have to build a lot of wax in there if they're going to go into a tree cavity. If they go into a swarm box, those will be cared for, of course, if we're giving them comb and maybe even feeding them. This time of year is the time when the resources are available, so that's why the swarms occur. They occur again in September. There's about 20% of the swarms occur at the end of the year. And it's sort of I've heard Tom Seeley and discuss this as a sort of maybe even a biological relic. Like, what are they doing? I mean, there's absolutely no chance of a colony that leaves in October preparing a brand new brood nest to survive the winter. Those all die. I've never heard of one ever living. They are, suicide swarms, we refer to them as. So that occurs, but the majority of them occur right now, and they will occur through June too. So it's never too late for your bees to leave on you and not make any honey. Don't worry, they do that automatically. If you are thinking of trying to get, if you've just loaded a new package and you're going by the common bee lure that a 1-to-1 syrup is the thing to feed this in this time to get them to draw wax, I think you can lower that ratio. So more water, less sugar, sort of mimics nectar a little bit better. Nectars are not usually 50% sucrose. There's other things in them. And there can be some that are very high in sucrose, but for the most part, if you think about the beekeepers, commercial beekeepers that are in the business of getting their bees to draw comb every year because they're selling nukes and they're making other splits and stuff like that, and they're using foundation and they want their bees to build comb, they put a lighter syrup in this time of year, less than 1:1. All right, and even some of them do half that, so it would be 1/2 to 1. So that would be a really light syrup. So a little bit lighter, and you'll get a better drawing mixture out of them. They're little wax cells. Thank you so much for attending, everybody. And we hope to see you here in June.